Hello, and welcome to this presentation by Storage Switzerland. Data protection needs a model. I'm your host for the presentation, George Crump. I'm the Chief Steward of Storage Switzerland. And this presentation is sponsored by our friends at Bocata. For the agenda today, we're going to give you a quick background on Storage Switzerland. Then we'll skip into the presentation. We'll talk about data protection and why we think it should be treated as a service. We'll really key in on some of the importance of managing to a service level agreement, and then we'll kind of give a quick overview on what the data protection service model should look like. So quickly, some background on Storage Switzerland. We're an analyst firm focused on the storage, server virtualization, and cloud markets. We gain knowledge of these markets through the use of our testing labs, interviews with end users like yourselves, as well as suppliers. In addition, everybody on our team has decades of hands-on experience. We take our findings and put those into white papers, articles, and screencasts that you can find at www.storageswitzerland.com, as well as our blogs and articles that we write for Information Week, Network Computing, and Search Storage. So first, let's look at some of the data protection challenges that people face today. One of the biggest ones is that there's just too many data protection tasks running on. Data is so critical and so important that we're constantly doing everything we can to protect it, and the problem is that we've sort of run into an overprotection problem. So for example, many environments now are using snapshots to protect information, as well as dumps for just the application itself, or maybe the platform that the application happens to run on. And as a result, many of these data protection attempts that are happening are redundant to each other. And finally, they often have conflicting retention strategies. The other issue is, of course, the whole world isn't made up of a single database server with a backup server. Clearly, there's other applications that we have to worry about. So as a simple example, what about the case of Exchange, where we have an Exchange server and an email store? Very often that email is being backed up and protected locally, as well as, of course, snapshots happening on that. Or even more often, that Exchange server is probably being backed up to an enterprise backup application on a Windows server, which of course has its own tape or disk backup. And the result of all this is we've got all of these data protection processes happening, and there's not really a huge increase in confidence in the ability to recover that information. So some of the impacts here is, first of all, we have a tremendous amount of added cost. We have all this redundant hardware and software, each being done on a different platform, and of course most of that hardware and software on the backup side is idle, except for the actual backup process itself. Also, waste operational time. You, in many cases, have different people running these different tasks. Those people also don't communicate very often, and they're busy doing their own jobs, and so there's a lot of overlap happening there. Additionally, there's added risks. As I said earlier, despite all the protection, we find that there's less confidence in an organization's ability to recover than there has been in the past. And really this comes down to there's no single point of verification. You have all these people and all these tasks, and they never meet, and there's no kind of sign-off that says, okay, yes, we absolutely have this protected. This also leads to added exposure. All these multiple retention policies really leave companies exposed to legal actions. For example, in that Exchange environment, if you're backing up and you have an enterprise strategy and you're backing up to your Windows Enterprise Backup as an example, and you decide, okay, for email we're only going to keep it for a year, well, unbeknownst to the backup administrator and maybe the person that's in charge of adhering to policy, the Exchange administrator may be backing up local and keeping that forever. Well, that's violation of policy. If that's found out, you're required to deliver all of your information, no matter how many papers you have saying that you're only keeping it for a year. If you're keeping it, you have something else that shows you're keeping it longer, then you have to deliver. This also sets impossibly high expectations. Recovery of any data at any time really becomes the mantra, and that really is a very high thing to shoot for and almost unattainable. Finally, then, recovery really becomes the measuring stick for the organization, and that becomes very challenging to manage too. So we think this really leads to the creation of what we call a data protection model or a data protection service model. You can map this similarly to the ITSM model that's gaining in popularity. The goals really are quite simple: drive down cost, increase efficiency, and of course increase recovery confidence. So let's talk about what it takes to develop this data protection service model. First, you have to understand what you have. You need a detailed inventory of all the backup applications and devices and things that you're throwing at the backup problem. And then also have an auditing of all these policies. The policies are, of course, the commands, if you will, that you're giving to these different applications and devices. We think this will lead to an increase in data protection success rates, just knowing what you have, as well as a reduction in redundant tasks. Once this inventory is mapped together, you'll see where the overlap may be. The second step we believe, and this is really critical, is to establish service level agreements, or SLAs. The big thing here is they can't be implied. We see many organizations where there's a quote-unquote understanding of what needs to be recovered, and in many cases that gray area really causes a lot of extra work on the part of the IT staff, and in particular the backup staff. So they have to be written. And then when you think as part of this model is that you then begin to manage to the SLA. You don't manage to recovering everything all the time. And this really becomes, like I said before, a critical component in driving the model. We think this leads to, gives you the ability to prioritize corrective actions. Let's face it, backups fail. If you come in the morning and there's a list of failures, how do you know which one to work on first? Either seat of the pants logic, or you just start at the top and work your way to the bottom. Well, you may not get all the way through. It's more helpful to know which ones are going to put the SLAs at risk, and start with those first. So it gives you some prioritization. Second, it reduces costs and increases staff efficiency. We can eliminate a lot of the redundant hardware and a lot of redundant processes, as well as let people do their real jobs and have one person in charge of the backup process. The overall impact of this is increased customer satisfaction, and maybe more importantly, increased customer awareness. This allows business line managers and the users of data to understand what their exposure is as far as recovery, and then they can plan accordingly depending on what your delivery is. If they know that they're not going to get every second of every data, then they can plan in their budgets to address that. And it also improves your audit readiness. You have a stated set of procedures and policies when you're audited for the ability to recover data and disaster recovery and things like that. You have a go-to guide that you can show people that allows you to really respond well. So we think, though, that data protection service management requires a new solution. We don't really think you can use today's SRM and the kind of typical data protection reporting tools that are out there. They just sort of take care of the inventory part. What you really need to understand is, what you need is a software package that understands the interrelationship between not only the inventory but also the policies and what your goals are, those SLAs. With those three understood and mapped or overlaid over each other, this now, a software package that can do that, then gives you the ability to analyze, monitor, isolate, and report on these results. So you can quickly go in, understand what's broken, isolate what you have to fix first, and fix it. And then more importantly, over time, is report on those results so that you can really generate a good score as far as data protection goes. And then closing, we think that Bocata Prism is really the first and good example of this new breed of software, and it's certainly worth taking a look at. Please go to their website at www.bocata.com. And if you have any other questions, please go to our website at www.storage-switzerland.com. I'm George Crump. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Have a good day.